Let everything that happened today move a little further away from you now. Not gone. Just further. The way a shore looks when a boat has been moving quietly for a while, still there, still recognizable, but no longer something you need to tend to. I want to tell you a story tonight about time. Not time in the abstract, rushing sense. Not the kind of time that makes you feel late, or behind, or not yet finished. I want to tell you about time in the oldest, most patient sense. Time is a thing to be made. Time is a thing that some people devoted their entire lives to understanding, measuring, and holding still, just for a moment, in the palm of a hand. This story begins in a street so narrow you could almost touch both walls at once. A cobblestone street in a Swiss town that had been there long before anyone alive could remember. The kind of street where the buildings lean slightly toward each other at their rooftops, as if they have been in a very slow, very gentle conversation for centuries. Where the stone underfoot is worn smooth in the center from all the feet that have passed over it. Where in the morning, the light comes in at a particular angle that makes everything look briefly golden, and then the shadow returns, and the street goes back to being exactly what it is, old, and quiet, and entirely itself. In this street, there was a workshop. It had been there long enough that the sign above the door had been repainted so many times that the original would underneath, if you could find it, would have a ghost of every name the sign had ever worn. But for as long as anyone in this story could remember, the sign said simply, mower. And beneath it, in smaller letters, watchmakers. Since always. The man who built the workshop was named Heinrich. He was not a remarkable-looking man. Medium height, broad hands, the kind of face that forgets to express things because the mind behind it is too busy. He had come to watchmaking the way some people come to their calling, not by choosing it exactly, but by following a series of small pulls, each one so gentle it barely felt like a decision, until one morning he looked up and realized he had arrived somewhere entirely right. He had apprenticed under an old watchmaker in the neighboring town, a man of very few words who communicated almost entirely through demonstration. Showing rather than telling, patient in the way that only people who work with very small things for very long periods of time learn to be patient. Heinrich learned to be still. That was the first and most important lesson of watchmaking, he always said later. Stillness. Not the absence of movement, but the presence of control so complete that every movement is chosen, deliberate, exactly as small as it needs to be and no smaller. Your hands had to learn to exist at a scale far below their normal life. To feel things that were almost too fine to feel. To adjust, and adjust, and adjust again, and to know, not by measuring, but by some other sense that developed slowly over years, when the thing was right. He opened his own workshop when he was still a young man. The first years were lean. Not cruel, just modest. He made repairs mostly, the steady, unglamorous work of returning broken time to working order. A cracked mainspring here. A worn jewel there. The kind of work that never gets celebrated but is, in its quiet way, a profound form of care. You take a thing that has stopped. You understand why it stopped. And you restore it to itself. He was very good at this. And slowly, by the particular arithmetic of good work in word of mouth, people began to come to him not just for repairs but for new pieces. And the workshop on the narrow street became, in the way that truly good places become, a place that people thought of when they thought of something done right. A mechanical watch, when it is made by hand, is a kind of argument. An argument that precision is possible. That a human being, with sufficient care and sufficient patience, can construct a system so reliable, so elegantly balanced, that it will measure the passage of time correctly for longer than the person who made it will be alive. Heinrich believed in this argument completely. He believed it not with the enthusiasm of a salesman but with the quiet certainty of someone who has tested the proposition personally over many years and found it true. He had made watches that his customers brought back a generation later, brought back by the children of the people who had originally worn them, asking for a service, a cleaning, a careful checking of the tolerances. And these watches, when Heinrich opened them, were still performing almost exactly as they should. A tiny drift from perfect, time allows that much, even a perfection, but essentially, stubbornly, beautifully right. He found this deeply comforting. He never said so explicitly. He was not a man who spoke about comfort easily. But you could see it in the way he handled these return pieces, the care that looked, to anyone watching, like a kind of recognition. Like greeting something you had made and sent out into the world and were glad to find still whole. His son came into the workshop at a young age. Not forced, he simply began appearing, the way children appear in workshops where interesting work is being done, drawn by some combination of curiosity and the desire to be near a parent who is concentrating. And Heinrich let him watch. And then let him hold things. And then, very gradually, let him try. The son's name was Emil. Emil had his father's hands. Under Emil, the workshop entered what people who later told its story would call the golden years. Not golden in the sense of wealth exactly, though the workshop was certainly prosperous. Golden in the sense of a particular quality of light that some periods of time have in retrospect, a warmth, a rightness, a sense of things being exactly as they should be. Emil had learned everything his father knew. And then he had gone further. He had a particular gift for complications, the watchmaker's term for the additional functions that a movement can be made to perform beyond simply telling the time. A moon phase display. A perpetual calendar that accounts for the different lengths of months without needing to be adjusted. A mechanism that chimes the hours in a tone so pure and so measured that hearing it in a quiet room was, people said, like hearing time itself clear its throat. Each of these complications required a separate piece of the mechanism, more gears, more springs, more jewels, more tolerances to hold, more relationships between moving parts to maintain at exactly the right tensions. More opportunities for something to go wrong. More calls on the watchmaker's patience and precision. Emile loved this. He worked very long hours. Not unhappily. The workshop was warm in winter. He had put a small cast iron stove in the corner that radiated a gentle, steady heat, and cool in summer from the stone walls and the shade of the narrow street. He had a small desk lamp with a magnifier attached, and under this lamp he would sit for hours at a stretch, moving in the unhurried, meticulous way of someone for whom the work itself is the reward, and the finished piece is simply the moment the work agrees to pause. He trained apprentices. Young people from the town and sometimes from further away who came wanting to learn. Some stayed. Some found that the patience required was simply not the kind of patience they possessed. Emile never discouraged those who left. He said only, "You will find your own kind of work," and meant it kindly. The ones who stayed were transformed by it. They emerged from their years in the workshop different people, quieter, more observant, possessed of a relationship with small things and long timescales that was visible in everything they did afterward, whether or not they remained in watchmaking. The world, meanwhile, was moving in a different direction. It was moving, as it tends to do, toward the faster and the cheaper. Toward things that could be made by machine in great quantities rather than by hand in small ones. Toward the good enough over the excellent. Not out of malice, simply out of the mathematics of scale, and the human tendency to choose what is available and affordable over what is rare and costly. Watches became something that most people own several of rather than one of. They became accessories, fashion items, things you replaced rather than repaired. The idea of a watch as a lifetime companion, something you wore every day and had serviced occasionally and eventually handed to someone you loved, this idea did not vanish, but it became rarer. A luxury, in both the financial and cultural sense of that word. Emile watched this change with the equanimity of someone who has always understood that the work itself is the point, and that the market for the work is a secondary consideration. He kept making watches the way he had always made them. He kept his prices where they needed to be to reflect what the work actually cost, and time, and skill, and the almost incalculable value of the knowledge that it had taken 2 generations to accumulate. And some people continued to seek this out. Not many, but some. And for Emile, some was enough. His daughter came into the workshop eventually. Her name was Clara. She had studied in another city and come back. She had her grandfather's stillness and her father's love of complications. For a time, the three of them worked together. This was, though they did not know it as they were living it, the last of the golden light. Emile grew old. This is not a sad thing, exactly. He grew old the way things grow old when they have been used well, with wear in the right places, with a kind of settled solidity, with the particular peace of someone who is not surprised by the direction their life has taken. He continued to work, more slowly, with longer pauses, with the magnifying lamp turned up a little higher than it used to need to be. His hands remained steady, which he was grateful for. He had seen other craftsmen lose the steadiness and understood what it cost them, not just the work, but the sense of themselves that the work had always carried. He was glad his hands remained. Clara ran more of the workshop now. She was a fine watchmaker, possibly, though neither of them would have said so aloud, finer than Emile in certain technical respects. She had a particular gift for the regulation of movements, the final and most delicate stage of completing a watch, where you adjust the timing by almost unmeasurably small amounts until the movement is as accurate as it is going to be. Where you are working not against any fixed standard but against your own best understanding of what the watch is capable of, and coaxing it toward that. She took on one last apprentice. A young man from a different country who had come specifically to learn from the Maurer workshop, having read about it in a journal dedicated to traditional craft. He was serious, attentive, quick to understand but slow and careful in application, exactly the right qualities. His name was Thomas. He would turn out to be the last. Thomas learned the workshop the way the workshop had always taught, through long proximity to someone who knew. He sat beside Clara and watched. He was handed things to hold and then things to do. He made errors, small ones, because the workshop had a way of catching large errors before they became irreversible, and he corrected them, and he understood from each correction something he could not have understood from a book or a lecture. He learned about springs and the particular way tension lives in metal. He learned that a gear train is a kind of conversation between moving parts, each one responding to the others, and that the watchmaker's job is to ensure that this conversation is harmonious, that no part is working harder than it should or more easily than the design intends. He learned about time in the way that watchmakers learn about time, not as an abstraction, but as a physical fact. Something with a rhythm. Something that can be captured in the relationship between a wound spring releasing its energy and a balance wheel oscillating back and forth at a frequency so regular it is almost beyond imagining. He loved the workshop in the way that people love places that have asked something real of them. The way the stone floor felt underfoot. The smell of clock oil and old wood. The sound of the small stove in winter the same sound it had made for as long as anyone knew. And Emil died in his sleep one winter, which was very peaceful and also the end of something. The workshop continued. Clara continued. Thomas was a watchmaker now, fully trained, and they worked together for several more years. But the orders were fewer. Not gone, there were always people, somewhere in the world, for whom what the Maurer workshop made was exactly what they wanted, and for whom the cost was not an obstacle. But fewer. And the administrative burden of running the workshop, the costs that had nothing to do with craft, the paperwork and the compliance and the simply practical arithmetic of a small business in a world that is not designed to sustain small businesses, these things wore at Clara in a way that the work itself never had. One morning, she came into the workshop and sat down at her bench. She picked up the movement she had been working on. She looked at it for a long time under the lamp. And then she set it down, carefully, and sat with her hands folded, and looked at the workshop around her, the tools on their pegs, the small stove, the stone floor, the narrow window through which the cobblestone street was visible in the gray morning light. She sat like that for a long time. Then she picked up the movement again and went back to work. She finished it. It was one of the finest things she had ever made. And then she closed the workshop. The sign came down. The tools were catalogued and sold, some to other craftsmen, some to collectors who understood what they were. The last clock in the workshop, a tall case clock that had stood in the corner since Heinrich's time, that had kept time through everything the family had lived, was wound for the last time by Clara herself. And then, when its spring eventually ran down and it stopped, it was not wound again. The hand stood still at a particular moment. That moment, which meant nothing and everything, remained on the face. It was the time that the clock decided to remember. It had been measuring time for more than a century, and now it held this one moment, simply because it was the last one it had been asked to hold. Thomas left the town eventually. He found work with another maker in another country, and carried what he had learned the way you carry something you learn young, not consciously, not as a set of rules, but in the hands themselves, in the stillness, in the particular way he moved when he was doing fine work. Clara went to live near her family. She kept a small workbench in her home and continued to take occasional repairs, not as a business, just as a practice. The way some people keep a garden, not to feed themselves, but simply because the tending of growing things is a need they have learned to recognize in themselves. The workshop on the narrow street became something else. A cafe, eventually. The cobblestones are still there. But here is the thing I want to leave you with. The watches are still out there. Every watch that Heinrich made, that Emil finished, that Clara completed, each one of those watches is somewhere in the world right now. In a glass case, perhaps, in the home of someone who inherited it and knows its value. On the wrist of someone who bought it decades ago and has worn it every day since. In a drawer, waiting to be found by someone who will wind it and be surprised that it still works. And those watches are ticking. Right now, in this moment, as you lie here in the dark, somewhere in the world a watch that was made by hand in a narrow cobblestone street is measuring the same second you are in. The same heartbeat of time. The same moment. The people who made it put their entire attention into the making. They put their stillness into it, and their patience, and their knowledge of how things fit together and what holds and what gives and what endures. They put, in the way that only handmade things can receive it, something of themselves. And that something is still there. Still moving. Still measuring. There is something very settling about that, if you let it be settling. The idea that the things made with care outlast the people who made them. That attention, given fully, leaves something real in the world. That the careful work of quiet hands matters, not because it is celebrated, but because it endures. The workshop is quiet now. The stove is cold. The tools are somewhere else. The clock on the wall holds its one still moment without complaint. But in the city where you are, right now, someone's wristwatch is ticking. Your phone, if you have one nearby, is measuring time. The whole world is measuring time, constantly, in 1,000 different ways, and has been since before any of us were here, and will be long after. And you, right now, do not need to measure anything. You do not need to track the night or worry about the morning. The night is doing its work without you. Your breath is finding its own rhythm now, not the rhythm you choose, just the rhythm your body knows. The slow, patient, uncountable rhythm of a body at rest. You are like the clock that has been wound and is simply running. Simply keeping its own time. Not hurrying. Not falling behind. Just moving through the night at exactly the pace the night asks for. Let your hands rest. Let your jaw settle. Let the thoughts that are still moving slow their gears, one by one, until the mechanism of the day is finally, fully, at rest. Somewhere on Cobblestone Street, the gray morning light is very far away. Somewhere a watchmaker's hands are still. And somewhere, a watch that was made with love is ticking in the dark, keeping perfect time, needing nothing from anyone, simply enduring. As you are enduring. Quietly. Warmly. Exactly as you should be. Sleep well.